So picture the streets of a bustling city for a second. You've got busy corners, crowded footpaths, hand carts literally overflowing with vegetables, the constant hum of bargaining. I mean, to a casual observer just walking by, it probably looks like pure chaos. But we really have to ask ourselves, are these spaces out of order, or are they actually due to order? Well, welcome to today's Explainer. We are unpacking a genuinely fascinating piece of research that acts as a total mythbuster about how our cities actually function. We're going to challenge pretty much everything you think you know about street markets.
Okay, let's just dive right into it. Order and informality. Challenges and formalization of informal markets in Ahmedabad. You know, often when we look at urban development, we kind of just assume that informal street markets are these random, messy encroachments that need to be quote-unquote fixed or cleaned up by city planners. But as you'll see, this research completely flips that assumption totally on its head.
To really wrap our heads around this, we got to start right at street level, way before the morning rush hour even kicks off. 5 a.m. The city is fast asleep, but the vendor is awake. Think about this. For over 2 decades, a vegetable vendor pushes his cart to the exact same corner every single day. Nobody from some formal city planning office gave him that specific patch of pavement, right? There are literally no painted lines with his name on it. So why there? Well, he goes there because he actually understands the city far better than most formal systems ever could.
Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. There's this invisible spatial logic driving that vendor's daily routine. His placement, it's not random at all. It is highly calculated. I mean, he knows exactly where commuters naturally slow down. He anticipates precisely where the afternoon shadows are going to fall so his produce stays nice and fresh under the hot sun. He maps out the flow of temple visitors stopping by before heading home. Completely understands the traffic patterns, knowing exactly when crowds gather and when he needs to shift just a few meters to survive. It might look like total disorder to an outsider, but it's actually a masterful adaptation to the urban rhythm.
Let's play a quick game of what if to really appreciate what's at stake here. Imagine waking up tomorrow and every single street vendor in Ahmedabad is just gone, vanished. Imagine the city without the vegetable carts, without the flower sellers, the countless tea stalls. Imagine it without those iconic historic spaces like the Ravivari market or the Law Garden night market, just wiped out overnight. Would the city even function the same way? Would you really be willing to travel kilometers just to grab your daily veggies? Would office workers start buying their morning breakfast from a high-end mall? No way! Ahmedabad simply wouldn't feel like Ahmedabad without its streets. And that brings us to the true value of these spaces. Informal markets aren't just these temporary, annoying occupations of space that get in the way. They are literally the city's last-mile economy. They form this incredibly essential, highly affordable food network. They are a rich cultural marketplace, and honestly, most importantly, they're a system of everyday survival for countless individuals. They are, for sure, the organic lifeblood of the city.
But here's the crazy contradiction. Despite being this absolute lifeblood, vendors have spent decades being repeatedly shifted, removed, and relocated. And usually this is just to make roads look a bit cleaner, make traffic move a little faster, and make cities appear more formal. The common assumption is super straightforward. Formalize the market, build proper stalls, relocate the vendors, and boom, you have order. But this study documents a massive contradiction. In reality, all across Ahmedabad, these newly built formal structures often just sit there, empty and totally underused, while the informal markets quietly and stubbornly just reappear right outside their boundaries. It's wild.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why top-down formalization usually fails. It fails because it only tries to reorganize the physical space without actually understanding the living ecosystem that's already operating within it. Street vending is not random, folks. It is a continuous, delicate negotiation. It's this incredibly dynamic relationship between the vendor, the user, the authority, and the space itself. A vendor chooses a metro pillar because, well, commuters naturally pause there. A flower seller sets up on a temple edge because the rituals going on inside create a demand on the outside. A weekly market survives for centuries because the entire city naturally converges around it. This is adaptive urban order, produced through everyday practice.
Section 1. 3 market stages, examining the friction in Ahmedabad.
So the study digs into 3 really distinct spaces to show this: the Thaltej AMC vegetable market, the Law Garden night market, and the historic Ravivari market. And each one of these represents a totally different stage of formalization and survival. Like at Thaltej, vendors who are placed inside a formal building often just migrate right back out to the street just to catch the eye of passing customers. At Law Garden, the market dynamically shifts from day to night, literally taking over different parts of the street to serve completely different crowds. And then you have the Ravivari market, which shows how this age-old informal gathering has to constantly fight to keep its traditional footprint against modern riverfront developments. All right, fast forward a bit. Let's look at how this builds international policy. 2014 was an absolutely critical shift in India with the introduction of the Street Vendors Act. At a policy level, this was a huge moment where the system finally started to recognize street vendors not as nuisances, but as actual workers with legitimate rights to the city.
But, as we often see, there is a massive canyon between the policy's intent and the actual ground reality. The promise of the 2014 Act was protection, participation, and inclusion. And hey, it sounds pretty perfect on paper. But in practice, we see incredibly incomplete formalization. Sure, vendors might be handed an official license, which regulates them, by the way, but they're given absolutely no supporting infrastructure, no access to basic services, and fatally, no access to their actual customers.
Listen to this, because this is the absolute crux of the issue. The quote is, "The city formalizes enough to regulate space, but not enough to sustain livelihoods." The result is selective formalization. Planners gain control of the physical real estate, but they accidentally sever the economic lifelines of the vendors in the process. And so, what happens next? Informality returns. Not out of stubbornness, it's not some organized political resistance. It literally returns out of absolute necessity. People simply have to survive.
So it's really time we entirely reframe our perspective. This research is urging us to stop viewing informal markets as urban failures or eyesores that just need to be erased from the map. They are actually intelligent systems of survival. They're highly adaptive, brilliantly efficient engines of economic exchange that fill the glaring gaps left by the formal city. Governments have tried for years to force these vendors into neat formal boxes through relocation projects and rigid structures, and the mere persistence of informality proves that the current process just doesn't work. And it doesn't work because the underlying logic is always ignored. Which brings us to our final, and honestly our most important question for today. How can formalization actually learn from the order and the spatial logic that is already embedded within these informal markets? How do we integrate rather than erase the organic lifeblood of our cities? Just take a moment to really think about that the next time you walk past a street vendor. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.